Sergeant and Mrs. Smith, you're going to love this house.
Is that a tub in the kitchen?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, I'm going to talk about the anxious philosophy of everything that's good is also bad. And this is, or nothing is only good, and whichever way you want to think about it. So I did a post on this. It will have, by the time you hear this, come out about a month prior. And before we get into the meat of this episode, please do subscribe. Most recent subscriber episode was Everything Ends. And in case that's too depressing, there's also oral sex on women, And in case you don't want to subscribe to that, but you're really interested in oral sex on women, you should just do the Lick It Right pre-recorded workshop on the Best Life Behavioral Health website presented by Heather Ray, our sexologist. So honestly, there are so many ways that I could take a tiny bit of your money, but if you want to spend even more, then you can certainly always book therapy or coaching directly with me or anybody at my practice. And, or you could just keep listening to the free episodes. So here we go. When you are anxious, you find the bad in everything. Or you could look at like the counterfactual to that, or is it the contrapositive? Remember the contrapositive? Anyway, you could say, am I somebody who always sees the bad? Well, then maybe I'm anxious or depressed, but in this one, we're talking about anxiety. So when people are anxious, even when good things happen, and this is how they were taught from childhood, even when good things happen, there's a bad side. Sometimes the bad side is even worse. So, because they finally got to the end goal and it's still bad. So that's even worse because they have nothing else to hope for. So what are examples of things that anxious people find to be bad? Having money. Oh my God. Now you have money. Holy shit. Now you first have a problem, right? Because maybe you'll lose it. Now that would be terrible because you've already had it. Then you would feel intolerably stupid and bad. Also, your kids are going to end up spoiled. You don't know how to invest it. Maybe you'll make the wrong decision. Maybe you'll have $1 million and you could have made 10 million, but instead you only have 1.5 million. Oh my God. Or maybe somebody will try to be friends with you only because of it. Or maybe you now don't have to work, but then you have no life meaning. 1 million ways. It's terrible, really. Money, oh my God, terrible, right? What's even worse? Being attractive. If you're attractive, then you can worry that people only like you for your looks. But holy shit, what if you're unattractive? Well, everybody knows that's not good either. So your child getting older and wanting to do new things, hang out with friends, wanting independence, oh my God, it's so horrifying. They may crash the car, they may get pregnant, they may become a drug addict. But then, of course, if they just sit at home with no friends, that's bad too. You see my point. Anything. Getting the job that you always wanted, oh my God, I could lose it. And also, now what? And also, it's not as good as I thought. And also, with great power comes great responsibility, etc., etc., etc. So when you are anxious, basically look up the symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder. You worry, and then when one thing gets resolved, your worry just flits like a little butterfly onto a different flower of a different topic. So when you're anxious, you are always anxious. And you think that there's going to be this state that you get to where you're not anxious, such as if your child gets older, if you get money, if you get a different job, whatever. If you move, if you, downsize, if you upsize, if you get a pool, if you get rid of the house with the pool, whatever, people get it on, if you have a dog, if you don't have a dog, whatever it is, you keep thinking that there has to be some kind of way for you to feel better, but it's a wherever you go, there you are situation. Everything good that happens, you also make bad because your worldview is to make things bad. This is what you're an expert at and you learned it at home. So if you think about it, everything was bad. So like if you wouldn't get into a college, that's bad. But if you get into too many colleges, oh my God, you have to make a choice and then you might make the wrong choice. And then what if it turns out that you wasted your time in college? I mean, these are the sorts of things that anxious parents say. If you're not dating anybody, that's bad. If you're dating somebody, it's the wrong person. If you're dating the right person, they might dump you. You know, it's like there is no winning. If you don't bond to your child, that's bad. If you bond to your child too much, God forbid something happens to them, you are going to be inconsolable and decimated and destroyed. And this may sound to a non-anxious person, who I hope that this is a very useful episode for both the anxious people really I want the episode to be, ideally, some people recognize that they're anxious. Some people that already knew they were anxious get the impetus to work on it and to really truly own that they're anxious. And for people who are married to anxious people to be like, oh my God, that's what's inside their head all the time. That sounds terrible. I feel for them so much. I'm not going to think of them as somebody who's consciously making a problem, but as somebody who's like has to make a problem. Like their entire worldview is that everything is a problem. And so that can cultivate empathy and make you say, man, I just learned a lot about anxiety and I think this is you, and maybe it's something you could work on with a therapist, because you see our kids are anxious and that stuff is passed down. And that can be your big motivator. I just spoke in the most recent podcast about using the kids as your motivator to do hard things. And in that one, these things are time limited. So I spoke mostly about the woman using it for career motivation and the man for motivation to work on his emotions and his ability to be present in the home. But you can also use the kids as obviously your motivation to work on your mental health issues. Because if your parents pass down their anxiety to you, then you're going to pass down your anxiety to them. And I've spoken a lot about how I grew up in an anxious home and I had to work super hard on not being anxious myself. And it waxes and wanes in different arenas. But at least in terms of health and safety, that was my number one thing to hack. I think I do pretty good with that one with my children. Not to perseverate on potential health and safety problems, which is a lot of what happened to me as a kid. So the point being, you got to notice at some point that you never feel less anxious. For, maybe for a couple weeks, everything waxes and wanes, especially around your cycle. Everything feels good. If you're a woman and anxiety rates are higher in women, then you're going to feel good in every way. Before you're ovulating, you'll be less anxious then too. And before you're menstruating, it's not just that PMS involves depression. It's also anxiety, And so if your anxiety is there all the time about even things that you used to think were good things, then you're not allowing yourself to ever be happy. I mean, think about that. It's really could be a huge epiphany and motivator. You can never be happy because definitionally, whenever you reach a goal that you thought would make you happy, you at least become anxious about losing it. At least. And possibly you switch it around in your mind so it's not even good anymore. So it's based on whatever the thing is. But at the very least, your anxiety is not allowing you to truly ever feel good about anything because you might lose it. And so this happens with children as they get older and older. And I have podcasts on why women get so sad about the kids growing up. But people who tend toward anxiety get incredibly anxious as well, not just sad. It's like you don't feel like you're maximizing the time with them. You don't feel like you're making it count. You feel like when you have a fight that this is going to be how they think about you forever. And by the way, it's interesting for people who are extremely not anxious, like insensitive people, the people that I call highly insensitive people, sometimes thinking about the exact same things that make anxious people crazy can be really like an eye-opener for them. So, for example, a guy, let's say, who has zero anxiety and just, goes around kind of yelling at the kids and he's like irritable, but it's not anxiety. It's more like depression or just because he got yelled at a lot. And so I could say to him, think about your kid in 20 years saying to their therapist, Dad yelled at me all the time. And that could be a really big motivator for that guy not to yell because he's never thought like that. But anxious people, oh my God, they don't stop thinking like that. Every time you have any sort of interaction with your kid, you're like, oh my God, I fucked them up. Oh my God, I fucked them up. This is exactly what they would tell a therapist about me. This is why we're going to be estranged. Oh my God, right? So when you're anxious, you have to learn that not everything that happens is bad and is indicative of a whole new level of bad. It's like as you attain a goal, it's almost like worry level unlocked, like a next level of worry is unlocked because now you have another thing to lose. Anxious people, they get more money. It's like they worry more. You know, you could always understand why somebody without money would worry. But people with money, they worry about losing it. They worry about identity theft. They worry about somehow they're going to make a bad decision and get taken in by somebody who wants their money and get the money will be taken away. And because they had it, it'll be worse, you know. It's like a whole other level. And of course, what it'll do to the children and what it does to the marriage, all this stuff. So if you're somebody like this, therapy can really, really help. Therapy is so good for anxiety. Anxious thoughts can be challenged. And quite honestly, anxious people are great clients because they're fucking anxious, right? I mean, they show up to all the appointments. They're on time. They want to work. They're anxious about not getting shit done in therapy. Sometimes we have to actually make that explicit. Like, you don't have to get a homework assignment every single time. If I tell you a book, you don't have to have it read within 3 days, you know? And so, like, we got to actually, like, look at the anxiety as it manifests in the session as well. And as I frequently discussed, looking at what goes on in the session is often the most, useful and eye-opening part of therapy. But anyway, in terms of other things you accomplish, there's basic exposure principles of talking about these thoughts that you never really talk about because on some level you know that they're, like, crazy anxious thoughts. So talking about them and then like over and over with somebody, it's imaginal exposure, as I've discussed in many of my podcasts about exposure as a primary way to treat anxiety, exposure with response prevention. And that means that you would like say the anxious thing that you fear, like the thing that you fear the most, and you would talk about it until you no longer get super anxious talking about it. And it just becomes, all right, well, I guess that is a worst case scenario. You know, my child could never talk to me again. And you would, let's say, talk about that, you know, as much as you would need to until that's just a thing you talk about. And it's not like this crazy fear that's encoded in your lizard brain and almost goes into the other part of your brain, you know, like the part that has all your narrative memory that's just like a thing versus the part that creates flashbacks. And a lot of this, you know, different parts of the brain stuff is why, trauma therapy tries to take the sort of memory, this is going beyond the purview of this, but I used to work with veterans with combat PTSD and stuff. And the entire point is to take these memories that they never discuss, that just come up in nightmares and flashbacks, and talk them through to the point that they get encoded in the narrative of your life. They're more in the frontal lobe than the lizard brain. And so there's that part of therapy for anxiety. There's literally just challenging your cognitive distortions with like an objective person who could be like, well, I don't know, you know, if it's that likely, you know, that it would destroy your kids' lives, that you guys have become wealthy, you know, I don't know, you know, like just like somebody just literally talking to you about the like reality testing, it's called. And there's also the fact that you're going to learn and delve into your family of origin, and this is often the most transformative part, and see that you learned this anxious style of being, so therefore you can unlearn it. It's not just endemic to you, it's not reality, it's not how smart people think or savvy people or people that are realistic or whatever. It's how your anxious negative family trained you to think, and therefore you can learn other ways, you know, of engaging in the world that are not toxic to you and your kids and do not make you feel like everybody's out to get you all the time and that no good deed goes unpunished, and you know exactly what I'm saying. Nothing is only good, you know. It can help you see that you were taught that, the same as you were taught whatever religion you believed in as a kid, or you were taught about, 2 + 2 is 4 or whatever at school. You were taught this. And so frequently recognizing that can show you that you can be taught something else. And certainly that you can teach your children both implicitly and explicitly non-anxious ways of engaging in the world, such that they don't have to carry on this legacy of anxiety and this terror about every new thing, terror of even attaining the goals, And it's interesting because I have podcasts about, there's people that whenever things get less hectic, they make them more hectic again. So this is like getting the new puppy or starting the home renovation right after your wife is like, you know what, I'm just not going to work at this job anymore. This job is stressing me out. I'm so anxious at this job. And then it's like a month, that she feels good. And then she's like, oh, I think we have to adopt a puppy now. The children really need that in their lives. It's like, what the fuck? Like, why are you making yourself upset? Well, it's because she was raised in a house where everything was so stressful. And she's raised to feel like you always have to be stressed and anxious. So if she's not stressed and anxious for a little while, she's like, subconsciously, it doesn't feel right. It feels like she's just coasting or like something feels off. So then she starts something else for herself to worry about, and that could be worth the price of admission, just that insight in and of itself. And again, if your wife or you or whatever, if you won't go to individual counseling, no, this is more about your spouse. If your spouse won't go to individual counseling to focus on their anxiety or depression or whatever, then get them into couples. And I have multiple podcasts about how to convince your spouse to get into couples, which people in my secret group have told me work, and people who have become my clients tell me work also, because everybody's going to go to couples if they want to stay married. And an anxious person is very anxious about divorce. So you can utilize that anxiety short term to get them into the help that they need. You could be like, well, this marriage suffers from your anxiety. And so therefore, or I need better help. I mean, it depends if you want to be a dick or not. You could say it like that, or else you could say, I want to learn how to better help you with your anxiety, or else you could just get them in on some other issue. We need to learn how to parent better, whatever. And then if you're in couples counseling and the person is super anxious, the couples therapist will be like, oh, like you're pretty anxious about XYZ. Maybe you should speak to somebody individually, and that's going to get more traction than just you saying it. And hopefully then at some point, they will get treated and they will work with somebody on this. All right. I hope you guys found this useful, and I hope you got something out of it. I'll talk to y'all soon. Have a great day.